I want to say a few words about the occasion that we are celebrating today and about this study of Islam in general. So here in Miami-Dade College and as part of the Jaffer Institute's mission, we study Islam and we introduce Islam to our students. So we are doing an event on interfaith dialogue among Abrahamic religions of Islam, Christianity, and Judaism.
We are here to speak to each other, to learn about each other, to find out where our similarities and differences lie, and to build relationships between and among ourselves and our different faith leaders.
I'm expecting today that we're going to see and hear from all three faith traditions information that will draw us closer together, that will give us a better sense of who we are, but more importantly, of whose we are, that we all serve this one God.
History in general teaches us a lot about life, and there's always that old adage that says history repeats itself. And just like in science and philosophy, when we study the past great thinkers, we learn a lot from them in terms of how they came upon some of the great ideas. And the thing about the prophets is that these are our great teachers of ethics and morals and virtue, and they have great life lessons. Some of their stories that have been passed on from that have been discussed in the great religions, that have been passed on from tradition to generation to generation, have taught us great lessons on life, how to deal with adversity, how to deal with sort of moral choices, right? The whole battle between good versus evil, right? The human being and the struggles that we go through, and how is it that we overcome suffering and difficulty. And we live in an age where, although we have a lot of luxuries and we have a lot of accommodations that they may not have in the past, we definitely have our challenges.
It's always good for people in the community. We all live in the same community, no matter what our faith is, what our belief is, and we all want strong, good communities. And so these opportunities are really special and important for building those kind of bridges to communicate, to share ideas, and to find out more about each other.
So today, when I was thinking about what to say as a prelude to this event, I thought that, I came across this beautiful verse actually from the Quran that I'm going to read, which I think best encapsulates the gist of what the Jaffer Institute should be doing and what this event is about. And the verse is from chapter 4, verses 163 to 65 of the Holy Quran. And it reads, "We inspired thee, Muhammad, as we inspired Noah and the prophets after him, as we inspired Abraham and Ishmael and Isaac and Jacob and the tribes, and Jesus and Job and Jonah and Aaron and Solomon, and as we imparted unto David the Psalms. And messengers we have mentioned unto thee before, and messengers we have not mentioned unto thee. And God spoke directly to Moses, messengers of good news and warning, in order that mankind might have no argument against God after the messengers. God is mighty and wise." And like I said, I think these three verses very beautifully, very succinctly, and very precisely encapsulate that essence of interfaith dialogue, empathy, understanding, and solidarity that we're here to celebrate by celebrating the life and legacy of the Prophet Abraham. Next, I would like to invite one of our community partners, MCCJ Executive Director Matt Anderson. Matt?
Shalom Aleichem, Assalamu Alaikum, and peace on to you. At MCCJ, we are hyper-focused on embracing diversity and building an inclusive Miami. And we do that through our strategic partnerships, like today, and through our programming. At MCCJ, one of the heartbeats of our programming is our clergy dialogue. And our clergy dialogue has so much history and legacy. MCCJ started off as part of a large national organization called the National Coalition of Christians and Jews. And that organization goes back to the 1920s, when organizations such as the Ku Klux Klan were coming into power. And the interfaith community came together, really a group of priests and rabbis came together and find ways to combat that type of hate. And fast forward to today, we're much larger than a group of just priests and rabbis. We embrace everyone, and we have priests, rabbis, imams, reverends, pastors coming together and locking arms in so many meaningful ways. And MCCJ and our clergy dialogue really embody Miami's history. They've been in the diversity driver's seat when it comes to the civil rights movement, to the McDuffie riots, to Elian Gonzalez, to today's troubling climate. And really, it's been so beautiful seeing the interfaith community come together with this recent Surfside tragedy. You have been the ones in the trenches and the ones that are keeping us together, and I commend you for that. So thank you, and I look forward to this beautiful presentation.
So without further ado, I would like to turn things over to Dr. Eric Larson. Thank you.
Thank you very much, and welcome everyone. It's a great pleasure to be with you here today, and I welcome my co-panelists here, and we do this because Eid al-Adha is coming, when our Muslim brothers and sisters remember the sacrifice of Abraham. My students in class, they always wonder, they have the sense that the history between Judaism, Christianity, and Islam has been more one of competition than of cooperation. Sometimes, we realize we have differences of opinion, but just as human individuals are each one different, these faiths can be different and yet cooperate and get along well and have good relations at the same time. I hear every once in a while people say that these religions are on kind of a collision course, that it's fated, that they cannot get along well. But if you study the history of the religions, you realize that that's not true, that there have been places and times when Jews, Christians, and Muslims have gotten along very well and helped and supported one another. So it's interesting, each of these three religions is a monotheistic religion. They believe in one God and only one God. But through their history, and this is a bright spot and something that can definitely be built upon, they have generally acknowledged that the God that we all worship is the same God. So it is possible that you could say, well, the Muslim God is a different God, or the Christian God is a different God. But as I mentioned, Muslim, Jewish, Christian thinkers have recognized that, yes, we all worship one and the same God, who is just and loving and kind. When you look at the great attributes in the Islamic tradition, the 99 names of God, they tell us something about the attributes of God. And not only that God is powerful and that God is majestic, pictures that we find in the other scriptures as well, but also that God is loving and kind, merciful and just. And so this is a common basis. And with that now, I'll ask the first question. So why do we call Islam, Christianity, and Judaism Abrahamic faiths? In one sense or another, we all see ourselves as children of Abraham. And what is the uniting role of their common forefather, the patriarch of monotheism, the prophet Abraham? So Dr. Supani, maybe we could begin with you.
Sure, thank you. As mentioned earlier, Eid al-Adha is an important event for Muslims, religiously, spiritually, because we're celebrating the great prophet Abraham. Interestingly enough, in the Arabic, we would say Ibrahim, and then you have Abraham, Abraham. And in the Hebrew, and I think my lovely rabbi can correct me if I'm wrong, it actually means that the name means the father of many, right? And he essentially is that figure. He is the father of many. And from the Islamic perspective, the youngest of the monotheistic religions, Abraham is this patriarchal figure in the sense that he was given sort of certain tests throughout his life from a very young age. His life is actually quite extraordinary when you read the tradition, and I know many of the stories are shared amongst our faith. So they're the favorite stories that children like to hear, because you see the young Abraham that's going on a journey trying to discover who is my creator. And he goes through philosophical and logical reasoning, trying to figure out, is it the sun, is it the moon, is it the stars? And he comes to the conclusion that there is this all-powerful creator. And then he goes through a set of trials, and in immense trials, challenges that you would think, it's incredible. And as he grows older, his wish is to have a son. And he realizes that the age of his wife and his own age is not very likely. And so he prays to God to have a son that is gentle and righteous. And that prayer is answered. And from that, from the Muslim perspective, he has two sons. He has Ishmael and Isaac. In the Arabic, you would say Ishaq. And from those two, because of his success and because of his relationship with God in terms of fulfilling all of the things that he was asked to fulfill, the promises, all of the challenges that he did, then God has promised him to have these nations that will come from those two children. And they did. They bore two great nations. So from the Islamic perspective, we have a complete reverence for the line that comes from Isaac, and then we have obviously complete reverence for the line that comes from Ishmael. And if you look at the world today, everybody that we see in the world, essentially we are children of Abraham. And so he is really this umbrella figure from our perspective. The other interesting thing is that in Islam, in our tradition, he has a very interesting, what we would call a kunya or a title, which is known as Khalil, the Khalil of God, which is translated as the friend of God. And he has a very unique relationship, and it's something that, of course, that would take a long time to explain. But in the gist of it is that his journey, his intimacy with his Lord, his journey and the things that he had to deal with, and the ultimate test that he had, which was when he was asked to sacrifice his son based on a dream that he had, he did so, and he, quote-unquote, passed the test with flying colors. And so he has this title, the friend of God, because he was able to fulfill those things. And then he had this very unique attribute that was very prominent. And in Islam, when we look at the prophets, we identify amongst the prophets that they have certain unique, they all have great attributes, but they have one that's more prominent. And his prominent was his hospitality, was the one that he never turned people away. He always wanted people to come. He wanted to serve them. He wanted to be this great host and to constantly serve and give. And that is the nature of the Creator, is to constantly serve and give without expecting anything in return.
Thank you. And Rabbi Fisher.
So much of what you said is also what Judaism also believes in, which I love. This is why we're here, to hear how we are so similar. For us, and Dr. Larson mentioned it before, that we see Abraham as with this one God, the first one to break away from a polytheistic culture of multiple gods and deities. And Abraham was the first monotheistic follower of this monotheistic God. But it's not just a monotheistic God, it's also an ethical monotheistic God. And that necessarily implies that the values and the teachings that God wanted to impart to Abraham, our forefather, are those of compassion and love and righteousness and justice. And that's exhibited throughout his lifetime because he was plucked from nowhere. We didn't know who Abraham was before he came to the scene and was told, Lech lecha me'artzecha me'avicha, go forth from your land, from your country, from everything you knew, to a place that I'm going to show you, to have that kind of faith and trust in this one God. This one God that was entrusting Abraham and Abraham's followers to spread the word and the truth of what God was proclaiming, that of love and compassion and justice. And we can see that exhibited by what you said earlier about him embodying this idea of hospitality. That was one of the most beautiful stories that kind of trickles and gets woven in through so many stories throughout the Bible and through our lives today, which I think is also so brilliant that we can still find relevance to our lives today. That idea of welcoming the strangers and guests into our home, where we can dialogue and learn from each other. That is to have an open tent and be able to bring in these three faith traditions and others into dialogue and to welcome them into the covenant of our people, which is really to say that a covenant that is welcoming to everybody, to recognize everybody as made in the image of God, which we say B'Tselem Elohim. And if we can really say with true conviction that we are all made B'Tselem Elohim in the image of God, then how much more so when we walk outside of our places of worship, to greet one another on the street when we see somebody who might not look like us, who might not pray like us, who may not have the same direction or rituals or ways in which we translate our values, but whose values at the core are the same. We can have a much brighter, more peaceful, more loving and compassionate world. And that's what I hope will happen here today, that this can be just the catalyst for us to recognize how much we share of love and compassion and righteousness, and then to bring that to the world, that maybe it just starts with one person, 3 people, 4 people, and all of you who are part of this discussion, and we hope we'll hear from you as well. So I think that embodies what the Jewish tradition is, to recognize all of the faiths and to see that we all do come from one God, not only a one God, but an ethical one God.
Yes. There's really nothing left to say because they're both so brilliant. But this is the one thing that I will say, though, is that one of the things about Ibrahim or Abraham is that Abraham unites all of us as people, no matter where it is in the world that you're from, right? So Noah had these 3 sons, Ham, Shem, and Japheth. And so we find that Terah, who is Abraham's father, is a descendant from Noah through his son Shem. And so Abram is how he's born, right? He's born A-B-H-R-A-M, without Abraham. And as Abram, the name really means exalted father. But then he at some point gets converted to becoming Abraham. And Abraham, as distinct from Abram, is moving from being just the exalted father to being the exalted father of a multitude. So we find every race and every nation of people on the face of the earth are together at first, right, in the stories that are told, whether it's in the Jewish Torah or in the Quran or in the Christian Bible. And all of them have the same story of the people coming together at the Tower of Babel, right? And they're looking for 3 things. The people at the Tower of Babel, they're looking to accomplish great things. They're looking to have a name for themselves, an identity, and they're looking for security. And you find that Abraham, just like many of us, was lost, right? Because it seems, right, because he goes first to Haran. He's born in Ur of the Chaldees. God calls him in Ur of the Chaldees in the Christian tradition. But he goes to Haran with his father, almost disobedient, almost rejecting what it is that God has done, although he follows along, right? But then God calls him some 25 years later again for the second time and says to him, no, you need to leave your father's house. You need to leave your father's people and your father's gods. And you must leave not only Ur of the Chaldees, not only Haran where you are now, but you must now go to this place that I'm sending you that you don't know the name to. You must just have faith in me. And so that's where it brings us all together today, right? Because all of us as children of Abraham, all are united in that one thing, that one purpose, and are all looking for those same 3 things today. We're all trying to accomplish great things. We're all looking for a sense of identity. Who am I? Who are we? And we're also looking for security. That's why I'm excited about this panel today, because I think we're going to get all 3 of those questions answered, and we're going to see how much we're so much alike in the 3 Abrahamic religions than we are different.
Thank you very much. And this is the perfect segue to the next question, which is, what are the great ideals in the Abrahamic faiths that each one of you represents? And maybe also we could just talk a little bit about, we had a short interview before we started, and we were talking about how relevant these ideals are today, or are they not relevant in our modern society anymore?
Just to say, since you framed it in terms of obedience, discipline, and faith, because we can go way beyond that. We'll focus on those for now, especially with regard to the binding of Isaac, which I know that we'll be getting into. Judaism sees Abraham's faith and loyalty and dedication to God as a model for us. And I say that with hesitation because there's a whole debate, as you probably know, about whether Abraham went too far. Would he have done that? Could we pray to God who would put his child, his son, to the test, so to speak? So it is not only a faith testing and a faith model, if you will, but it's also a hesitation of not going too far, about having that ethics and that sense, that voice inside of you that will tell you not to go so far, to argue, to debate the issue, to have the confidence and the faith in your journey enough that you know the difference between right and wrong and when a line should be crossed. So faith, yes, but I hold it in the same hand as a cautionary story of not going too far and trusting in your own sensibilities, your own ethics, and your own morals to know where that line is.
So obedience, faithfulness, and selflessness. No, it's interesting about this person, Abraham, who's so revered by all of us in terms of obedience. So it seems that Abraham is indeed, we can all agree that Abraham is this individual who is very kind and very generous, right? We see that in the story of his interactions with his nephew Lot, and how it is that he says, unlike us today, when we came to South Florida and we looked around for a place to live, we didn't say to our nephew, no, you choose the area that you find that's best for you. And if it's Coral Gables, you stay there and I will stay here in Opelika and I will build life here in this terrible place, or in a place that's less than this wonderful place in which you're living. So clearly Abraham is generous. Or is the Abraham that we're looking for the Abraham who says to his wife Sarah when there is a famine in the land, does Abraham remain faithful to God when he leaves the land to which God has sent him and he goes down into Egypt, right, to relatives, right? That's what it is. We're all one family. And he goes to Egypt, and when he gets to Egypt, he says to his wife, listen, tell them that you're my sister so that they won't kill me, right? And that they'll be good to us. Is that the thing about Abraham that we like the most? No, I think the thing that we find drawn to Abraham and why Abraham is seen as a friend of God, and the reason why I believe as in the Christian world, right, why we believe that Abraham is this great leader, this great prophet, this great forefather, is that despite the fact that Abraham was a man, despite the fact that he was human and that he had human frailties, Abraham was always quick to turn his course and to ask for forgiveness and to correct course and to do that thing which was right. So it's interesting that God asks of him the ultimate sacrifice that to us today seems abhorrent, to sacrifice your only son or your son, one of your sons. But that wasn't abhorrent at the time. That was what was being practiced all throughout Canaan at the time. It was normal for people to do that. Normal for people to sacrifice their children so that they could obtain a better life in that region of the world. So when God asks that of Abraham, Abraham is not thinking, oh, this is such a horrible thing. Although on a personal level, he's thinking, wow, this is my son whom I love. However, the word that's used in the Quran, in the Torah, and in the Bible, it's the word nasa, the Hebrew word nasa. But that Hebrew word nasa really means to take you on a journey, to take you to a proving ground, for you to show yourself that you truly will make the right decision. And I think that's what Abraham ends up doing, because God intervenes. And that's the same thing for all of us. As all of us are seeking after nationhood, as all of us are seeking after a sense of identity, as all of us are seeking after security as a people, God is going to intervene if we seek him, if we reach out to him and recognize that we all really are just one, and that we're serving this one good God and Creator, he will intervene in the midst of time before we make the ultimate treacherous wrong decisions, and will make sure that we come together and do that which is right, which is to save the life of his son and to sacrifice a ram that was in the bush.
Can I just add one thing to you
Sure.
before you? Because you had mentioned about being relevant, and like how is this relevant about a sacrifice of a son today? And I think that if anything, it makes us question what in our lives are we willing to sacrifice. I don't mean to go so far as to sacrifice our children, God forbid. I'm talking about really to take a hard look at ourselves and find out what is it that we're willing to sacrifice for the good of our community, for the good of mankind. Then we need to ask ourselves that question about what we are willing to sacrifice, and also to talk about when we fall short, how we can repair that relationship, repair ourselves, and come back to a better part, a stronger part, a more convincing part, a more dedicated servant of God.
Interesting about Ibrahim in the Islamic tradition. You know, sacrifice, the actual word from the Latin sekar, and then also sacrificium, is to make holy, to give, to make holy. That's where it comes from. To give something, to give up something for a good, for a very important good. And that's the idea. So when we say, like, I sacrifice myself for you, right? Like mothers sacrifice for their children. It's because of the tears and toils and the blood that they have to go through and the pangs of childbirth. From the Muslim's perspective, it's actually looked not so much from the outward, but from an inward reality, sort of very metaphysical component. Because the Muslim scholars will say that when Abraham had the dream, he didn't actually see his son. And there is a difference of opinion in Islam of whether it was Ismail or Ishaq. Some of the earlier scholars would say it was Ishaq or Isaac, and some of the later ones would say it was Ismail. But it's interesting, in the Quran, the name is not said because it's not the point of the story. The story is about his son, right? And in the dream, he doesn't actually see him being killed or sacrificed. He sees that he's at the altar, and he's been told that you have, and so he's seeing this, and he sees it. And then what happens when he has the dream, he actually does like a verification. He said, well, is this just from myself? Is it some evil whispering? Or is this really divine? Like, is God telling me? Are you telling me to do this? And then he has it's confirmed and repeated, and he's told to do this. And then he goes and he resigns. He makes a sort of resolution that whatever God has asked me to do, there is good in it, right? It's not going to be of evil. And he has that resolve. And so when he takes his son, the son actually realizes what's happening. And so when he realizes, he says to his father that, and he says that you do what you have to do, and you will find me, God willing, to be a patient one. And there, again, Abraham is for himself, he said that I had asked God for a righteous son, one that would be obedient and that would be gentle, and that is what he gave me. And so when the moment comes where he actually has to do, when he goes and he sets everything up, there's a whole dialogue between the son and the father. The son is telling him, well, make sure you do it this way, and you do it this way, and don't do this. When you afterwards, don't take my bloody clothes to show my mother, because it will be hard on her. And then, of course, the story is that when that moment comes, then the ram is brought forth by Gabriel, and then he is told that the dream that you saw, right, that image, right, was, you're seeing an outward image, but in reality it was a ram that was going to be sacrificed. It was not going to be your son. And so the lesson of that is that oftentimes God puts forth tests to us, and there's suffering, and we don't understand the purpose or the point of it. You're kind of like, why am I going through this trial or tribulation? And there's an inward reality. It is going to teach you something. It is going to do something. But it all falls back on having that trust and reliance on God. And so to that question that you had about obedience and faithfulness and virtue, all of those things are wonderful, but I think that the focal point of it is having that complete reliance on God. And if you look at Abraham's life, the sacrifice is one aspect, but when he was thrown into the fire, he had reliance on God when he had opposed Nimrod, right? He was thrown into the fire and the fire became cool, right? That was that in the Muslim tradition when he left Hagar and her the small son in the desert in Mecca and just left them there, which is also part of the al-Adha story and celebration. And he walks away and she's like, are you just going to leave us here in the desert where there's no water, there's no food, like there's nobody here, there's nothing here, it's uninhabited? And, he walks away. And for somebody to do that, he knows that God has a reason for it. And then she calls after him and says, is this what you've been commanded to do? And he said, yes. And so then she also as a righteous woman, has that resolve, knowing that she's going to be taken care of. And so the idea is just really that he is having this complete reliance, and from that stems all of the other things where you have the virtues that come having courage and sacrifice and charity and all those things, because you have that complete trust in God. And I think that's really sort of where the foundation lies, I think, in the Muslim perspective, really, of that story. It has a lot of lessons for us, because though we're not seeing dreams of sacrificing children, we do face a lot of adversity, and oftentimes we don't know why we're going through a certain trial and tribulation, but we go back and we say that, whatever I'm here to face, I'm going to face, and I trust in God and the outcome. So.
This is an amazing panel, I have to tell you, because we're hearing the meaning of words. What does sacrifice mean? What does testing mean? And you can see the dedication that they have to understanding the text. You're also getting a lot of the details of the stories. And here and there, I'm also hearing the differences within the traditions. So we represent traditions. Sometimes my students will tell me, what does Christianity say about this? And I'll be like, well, what's Christianity, right? There are Christians, but there's not one Christian answer. So as we saw, some Muslims talk about Isaac, because in the surah that talks about the sacrifice, earlier it mentions Isaac. Others in the Muslim tradition believe that it's Ismail or Ishmael. Because the question a lot of people have, how similar are Judaism, Christianity, and Islam? So if you know the Muslim tradition well, today Muslims pray facing Mecca. But in the past, they used to pray facing Jerusalem. And this was something that was similar between Judaism and Islam. And of course, the worship of God in a service, if you go to a synagogue service, if you go to a service in a mosque, you'll be impressed that the core of it is prayer. So prayer as a means to approach God, to approach the divine. I'm always happy when I talk about the history of early Islam, and I try to emphasize this again because so many of my students come in thinking that this is only competition. When I talk about the life of Muhammad, and some of you will know this, there's an individual who was known as Waraka ibn Nawfal, who was a relative of Khadija. And when Muhammad received his first revelation, he was a little bit taken aback. What's happening here? Khadija said, I know someone, one of my relatives, Waraka, and I'm going to take you to him and maybe he can help you. Waraka was actually a Hanif. So a Hanif was a pre-Islamic monotheist. And she brought him to Waraka, and Waraka said, God is speaking to you. So don't be fearful of it. Wait and see if God speaks again, and gave him some encouragement. And this is a good sign, right, in the early days. And then another one that's really significant for me was when the polytheists in Mecca really did not react very well to Muhammad and his message of one God. And persecution arose. Eventually, the persecution for some of the followers got so intense that they needed to leave. And before the emigration to Medina that Muhammad made, there was an immigration to Abyssinia. So they fled and they sought refuge there. But the king had some trading relations with the polytheists in Mecca. And so they sent a delegation after them and said, we know this guy, he's friendly to us, we'll get these Muslims back and we'll be able to punish them. So the king, he did recognize the ambassadors, and he said, I trust you, so I'm going to give the Muslims over to you. But the Muslims, before they did this, because they knew what was going to happen to them, they said, King, if you would just let us read a little bit of the words that our prophet has given to us. And they started to recite the Quran. And the sources tell us that tears started to flow down the king's face, and he said, this is exactly what I believe. and no, I'm not going to give you them. They have done nothing wrong. So with that as a kind of a little bit of a background, maybe you could tell me, what you see as the commonalities and just that general question, how similar, and what do you see in the other traditions, not your own? How do you appreciate them? How do you approach them? And
You go ahead. You want to go?
Sure. All right. Yeah. So I see a lot of commonality. So one of the things that you mentioned earlier was this whole notion of prayer, of us, well, one, all being monotheists, but reaching out to this God who we can't see, who we can't reach out and touch, and who seems to be invisible. And all of us say that the way to reach out and to relate to him is, one, to read his word, right? Whether you're reading the Torah or the Quran, or you're reading the Holy Bible, is one way of touching him and reaching out to him. Or another way of reaching him is by this concept of prayer. And whether you have your eyes closed, or you're kneeling, or you're standing, or you're genuflecting, or your face is towards Jerusalem, or your face is towards Mecca, or your face is not in any particular direction. All of them believe that we're able to speak to this invisible God that cares for us, that is concerned about our future, that's concerned about how we relate one to another, that wants us to be kind, wants us to be compassionate, and has our best interest at heart. And so we use that mechanism, that vehicle of prayer, to reach out to him. God came to him because at the time, Abraham is living in this place that's very much like South Florida. It's a place of a melting pot of people, all speaking different languages. It's a place that is the crossroads of the rest of the world. It's a place where people are wealthy. In fact, in this area where God first comes to him, it's the first place that we see in 500 years before the Christian era that we see the first mention of a bathtub. These are people who are fairly wealthy and who are fairly sophisticated, just like all of you, just like the students at these universities. But God comes to them and he says to Abraham, I'm reaching out to you where you are. Right? In the midst of what you think is the most important thing, in the midst of what you think is the only way to worship God, God reached out to man. And that's what I believe God is doing today. That God is in fact continuing to reach out to each and every one of us. All three faith traditions are looking for this returning king, for this one who is going to come and is going to bring peace, is going to bring contentment, is going to justify everything that we're looking forward to. It's interesting, though, that when God spoke to Abraham, and in the Jewish tradition, it says that the Jewish people are the chosen race. But what are they chosen for? They're chosen for a number of things, right, is what God says to him. You're chosen, one, so that you can demonstrate to everyone on the face of the earth how it is that people relate to God. Secondly, you are the chosen people because I want you to be witnesses on my behalf to others. So that you're chosen not for yourself, but you're chosen so that every race, every creed, every ethnic group, every person on the face of the earth can come to know the one true God. And you're chosen not only for those two things, but you're chosen so that you can point to the ultimate end, when God will return on the last day. And that's what's so exciting about all three faith religions being on this panel and this platform today, because in fact we have so much in common, but the most important thing that we have in common, that all of us are pointing towards God and serving him.
All of us here would agree on the 10 Commandments. No one's going to debate those, right? And we believe them. And I firmly believe if people were following the 10 Commandments today, vast majority of our problems wouldn't be there, right? I mean, those are the basic sort of golden rule, do unto others as you would like to have done to yourself. Just the idea of just having common goodness, virtue, these type of things. You brought up the point about competition. There is competition. Yeah, why not? It's a good thing because we're competing for good. And we should be supporting one another and not kicking each other down and pulling each other down, but we should have a race towards goodness, towards virtue, to doing good. Whether it's charity, giving, helping one another, helping the poor, the disenfranchised, the elderly, a lot of the common social justice issues that we're seeing today, right? We should all be supporting one another and reaching them. Some of us may be better at it than others, depending on the circumstances, right? We all come from different places. You have we have the Honorable Consul General from Turkey. There's things that Turkey's done that is extraordinary, and we should be supporting that as a nation, as a people. Same thing in another country, and so forth. It shouldn't be that us versus them. It's actually what can we do together to improve the state of the vast majority of people. That's our competition, and that's a competition of goodness. And in the Quran, God says that. He says, vie with one another in goodness, in virtue, not in evil, not in bringing each other down. And we're very good at bringing each other down as a human race. It's very good to criticize people and to call them names. But you have to look and see, where can I see the good in people? And there's that story of Abraham, and I know we made reference to it earlier, when he was always looking for someone to break bread with. And there was this kind of disheveled man that came, and he was unkept, and he sat down, and Abraham welcomed him into the house, and he said, so who are you? And he said, I'm so-and-so, and he says, well, what do you worship? What do you believe? He says, I worship the fire. And he says, the fire? He says, how could you worship the fire? He says, you have to worship the one true God, and he was telling him about that, and it bothered Abraham so much that though he served him food, he didn't eat with him. He didn't treat him the same way. And so the man left. Abraham came back out to see, and he saw that the man had left, and he was like, oh, he left? And so that's when God said to him, he said, he came, I've been feeding this man for years. He came one time to your home, and you couldn't be hospitable to him? And he said, you need to rectify that, right? And so then he felt so bad that he finally went 10 days, the story goes, that he journeyed to find him. And he saw the man really sort of forlorn, crying, and he was saying to himself that I went to see the Khalil of God, the friend of God, and that's how I was treated. And so then Abraham asked for forgiveness and eventually convinced him to take him back so he could serve him. And so then he said to him, why are you doing all of this, the man, the fire worshiper? And he said, because my Lord was upset. He said that he's been feeding you for all these years, and you came one day and I didn't treat you well. And he said, if your Lord has so much compassion, he says, the fire that I worship always burns me. He says, I want to accept your faith. And so then he became a believer. God's mercy and vastness, if we really believe that his mercy and vastness is grand, and I think all of the faith traditions would believe that, then who are we to be selfish about that love and about that grace and about that mercy? And that we should do that. We have our differences, and they're real. But they should not be a bone of contention. And there's many examples, as the professor had mentioned earlier, where the religions have actually supported one another, have actually encouraged one another in fields of medicine and knowledge, in social services and things like that. And I think that's an extraordinary opportunity today. And one of my teachers said, he brought up a point recently, and he said, it's kind of like if I say I know Muhammad, he's my friend and he's such and such. And then Robin says, I know Muhammad, he's like da-da-da-da-da, and she may see some other qualities. And you say, I know Muhammad, and he sees that. So though it's the same person that we're talking about, we may have a different perspective, right? Or a different view, or different facets, right? But we're talking about the same. And so though theologically, I may have differences about understanding all of what encompasses in something so grand and vast as understanding God, right? We are speaking about the one who sustains the universe, the one that provides, the one whose overwhelming quality towards his creation is mercy and love. And I hope with that, we can continue to race for good instead of evil.
I love what you both said, and I want to pick up a little bit from what you were just articulating so beautifully, because I think that there is something else that we can learn from Abraham. And I point to the story of Sodom and Gomorrah, when Abraham debated with God of all people, of all beings, that it wasn't taking it at face value. It was fighting for an injustice that was about to occur, fighting for life, fighting for a moral value. It was finding his place to speak out and be vigilant against injustice. And I think that that is something that we all share, and that if we can come together to see when any one of us might be persecuted, discriminated against, seeing injustice in the world, that it is our obligation, it is incumbent upon us as children of Abraham to use our voices of influence, to speak out, to protest inequality, to protest any time that somebody is being called out for being less than human, because we are made B'Tselem Elohim in the image of God. And so as faith leaders, as children of God, of Abraham, that we need to be vigilant about making sure that no person, the color of their skin, the religion that they pray with, for the God they believe in, the sexuality that they subscribe to, the relationship or the love that they express, should ever be looked to as anything less than beautiful and loving and wonderful, and as part of what it means to be human, in all of our diversity and all of our colors and all of our traditions. Don't want that to fall on deaf ears, that it's not just the praying, it's not just the faith, it's what we do with our prayers, and it's what we do with our faith, with our hands, with our voices, with our feet, to protest when the world is gone awry, and it feels like it today. So I hope that we can all find a way to speak out and use our voices accordingly.
Thank you. I think you can see the moral vision is very similar. I love the point that you made about competing in good works. Christians can look at Muslims and say, wow, they pray 5 times a day, right? How much do I pray, right? And it can be an encouragement to us, whatever tradition we're from, to look at our brothers and sisters in the other traditions and say, okay, that they're dedicated, right? And recognize the good qualities in them and be inspired by that. As well, I would point out some of the ideas in the other traditions. You say, that idea is in my tradition too, or that disagreement, or, that discussion. And I see, this is how we handle it. I like it because interfaith dialogue doesn't always mean just that you say, well, we're all the same, right? That's a very broad statement, but we each have individual characteristics and qualities, and it's important to recognize them. And of course, we have different histories behind us as individuals, different experiences, these traditions. Now, you all went beyond me a little bit in talking about not only the view towards each other, but also the view to kind of people outside of these 3 monotheistic traditions. And Dr. Subhani, you mentioned it with the fire story. I will mention in the Bible, the New Testament, it mentions God makes his sun to rise on the just and the unjust. We might think, well, God is only going to be good to the just people, so why do I have to be nice to the unjust people, right? But we have to be good to everybody, right? And there are traditions in all of these 3 religions that talk about doing good to everyone. And in Judaism, the great idea of tikkun olam, right, to make the world a better place. We're here in South Florida. We are a community, whether we like it or not. We live side by side, shoulder to shoulder. What is the role of our 3 faith traditions? So what's your vision for what the traditions could contribute? Obviously, there are some people today who say, well, religion is passé, it's old, the sooner we forget about it, the better. So how do we work together? What's your vision, and what are some things that we're doing and that we need to be doing?
I think throughout history, we're always hearing that religion is passé and irrelevant, and then it becomes relevant all the time. It's very interesting. Religion is here to stay. It's not going anywhere. As long as there's human beings, there's going to be a religion, because it's an essential part of people. Just to give an example, my mother-in-law received her vaccine at a synagogue. Now, you would think like, okay, and it was in partnership with the Muslim community, the Islamic Center Greater Miami, and with the Jewish community. And so you have already, you have two faith-based groups that are working together to provide a health service that's essential. During the pandemic at the Islamic Center Greater Miami, there was food that was being distributed, and the people that were coming, there was no identification card that was being asked, are you a Muslim, or are you a Jew, or are you a Hindu, or what are you? People, the doors were open, people came, and the food was distributed as an act of just love and kindness and charity. And so, those are just one aspect. In the Surfside tragedy, you have people of all groups, regardless of religion, whether they believe or not, right? They're coming to help just out of this common, shared pain of a loss that's been suffered, that has happened in our community. And it's great just to see the community come together. And in the pandemic, I think we can say that the churches, the synagogues, the mosques, and other faith-based organizations have really come together and worked together to actually help people, whether it's just through simple counseling and prayer, which is very powerful, whether it was through providing services like the vaccinations or providing food and support, providing support to healthcare workers and things as such. And so this is just one small example in our community. This has been happening at a larger scale, at a global scale, that people are trying to help one another. When India was suffering through a crisis, you had many countries throughout the world that were trying to support them and help them. It wasn't, this isn't about or you're Indian and I'm such and such. It was about you're a human being and you're in need. And I have something that I can maybe offer, so let me be of service to you. I think our father, if we would just say Abraham, that's his legacy, and he's passed it on. And in his prayer in the Quran, it says that, he prays for his children and for the parents and asks God to forgive them and for them to establish the prayer, meaning to be prayerful people. And you say, well, what does that mean? It says prayerful people, meaning people that reflect on God. Right, and then that will help guide them to make sure that they act in line with what is becoming of the people, of the children of Adam, right? Because of his father, who's Adam, to be the children of Adam, that meaning people that give and follow those 10 commandments and do good and are not out there for themselves or to behave selfishly. And so we have our challenges, like Robin said. There's a lot of things that are going awry, unfortunately, but I think we have hope. When you see people coming together, when you see events like this, when you see people giving up something of themselves to help somebody else, it gives you hope in humanity, in just the common good. And hopefully that's something that we're going to carry forth and teach our children so they can carry that on, because we don't know, with artificial intelligence and other things, where things are going to go in the future, right? There's a lot of things that are kind of like, wow, where is this headed? But all we can say is that we're here to try to help one another and build for the better.
I thank God that we live in a community where multi-faith dialogue and relationships abound. And it's true, I know, I hear the campuses all over the country, in particular in the world, are facing strife and incredible challenges. But I don't know where it comes from, but here in Miami, we've had such incredible dialogues, and where we hope to build stronger foundations so that we won't in the future have issues that other communities are dealing with. The other is that I think that we can create, especially on campuses, sacred spaces where it's okay to talk and to have faith in each other and our vision for a peaceful, healthy, collaborative world. That we don't have to have all the answers. In fact, we may come out of here with a lot more questions than we do answers, but we could have a vision of a better tomorrow, a better future, and that will start with each of us and how we can draw on the traditions of our collective traditions and the beauty and the values that emanate from them, and to bring that together and to remember, just to draw on an imagery from our discussion of the binding of Isaac. Abraham finally, even if it was in the last minute, looked up and he saw a ram to replace the sacrifice that was about to happen. He looked up maybe one of the things that we need to do is see. We need to look around us in a much more nuanced way about where there are challenges, where there are discriminations, where people are in pain and hurting, and see how we together can come together and create healing where there is pain, to mobilize in an effort that will bring healing to the world collectively, because together we have so much more power and strength and resources, and it's really so much nicer and more beautiful and more sense of more peace and wholeness that we can receive in the world when we can work together towards a good, instead of clashing and finding ways to butt against each other and to point out our differences. When any one of us finds each other in need of support, whether it's the African American community, the Muslim community, the Jewish community, and anything in the LGBT community, that we are all God's children, and we need to look up and act and mobilize and speak out like Abraham did.
So powerful. Both of you are just amazing. Listen, what's exciting about South Florida and the United States in general is this, that we are uniquely positioned to showcase these three religions, but to showcase it in a particular way. You see, very often as Muslims or followers of Islam, we say, well, this means total commitment to the will of God. And so that makes me impressive and that makes me great. Or I am the chosen, one of the chosen people, right, as a Jewish person. You say, that's what makes me so great. Look at me. Or the Christians say, no, we have it right. We're the only ones who have it right. The rest of you don't know what you're doing. And that's what makes me great, right? It's kind of funny. Because it's funny and sad. Because the whole thing of religion, the whole thing of what God was trying to do, was to have us not look at ourselves and say, look how great I am. God was saying to Abraham, and he's saying to us today, look outward and say to others, come and know the God that I'm serving. Not that you're looking internally at yourself and thinking how wonderful you are. So we had members of the Christian community here in South Florida who were concerned about these group of people in Ethiopia who were called fallacious Jews. And fallacious Jews is in fact a derogatory name. It's the same as calling someone nigger. In fact, they call themselves Beta Israel. So you had this collection of Christians here who said, listen, these people are Jews living in Ethiopia, and they're being discriminated against. We are going to support them by paying for them to be flown over to Israel so that they can have a place where they feel safe and secure. It's when there's an attack on a masjid in South Florida, or there are iftar dinners being held in a particular masjid in Kendall, where they were attacked in the past, and they've kept the bullet holes in the ceiling of the masjid. And so we have Jewish scholars and we have Jewish rabbis coming out in solidarity with the Muslim community, saying, no, we're with you. So the one thing that we can do here in South Florida and that we can do in the United States is that we can say to the rest of the world, this is how people of these three Abrahamic faiths live, in peace, in harmony, and in unity. Not because we don't understand the differences in each other's religion, but because we understand the differences, because we are respectful of these differences, and because we know that ultimately our role as Muslims and Jews and Christians is to point the world towards the one true living God.
Thank you. And that's worthy of a round of applause. I want to thank all our panelists today for your thoughtful comments and for bringing us so much to think about and to ponder. Yes, a round of applause for sure.
I really enjoy and try to contribute as much as I can to this peace and friendship among religions, but not just religions. I refer to all communities. That is the ultimate goal. I think our message should be to the community, that we should be hand in hand whenever there's a need, but for that we should know each other first.